is going to go to pretty much what each of you have spoken to. So again, any or all of our speakers, please feel free to give your input. And the first one I want to get to is what product or service, or is there one out there that you could use to find that a social security number is linked to a minor?
Carmel. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier in my presentation is that with the SSA randomization, synthetic identities are actually able to use a lot of these randomized identities that would have either only been issued to a minor or to a new immigrant after 2011. So I think that over the last couple of years, we've worked really closely with the SSA and as with many other companies to kind of make this problem known. And so they are going through a process right now where they're trying to get something passed where you could be able to reach out to them and see if this was a legitimate social and if it was issued to a minor or not. So I know there's currently you can do this with a wet signature from the applicant. So if it was a legitimate immigrant and they wanted to sign off on it, they could go back and check it. And I think that the process to kind of speed that up and have that indication be earlier on is underway. I think that, it's difficult to tell with any kind of government bill how quickly that will move, but they are aware and working on that kind of problem where you would be able to see if this is something that belonged to a minor or not.
Excellent. Any other thoughts from our speakers?
The only other piece that I would add to that is it's the S2155 where we're sort of working through implementation. As Carmel said, the timeline probably looks like 2020 at the earliest, but could be longer. For SSNs that were created before, you could have done it as Carmel said, but the randomization kind of messed the whole thing up.
Excellent. Thank you. If a synthetic ID fraud app is identified, is there ability to remove the CBR inquiry to avoid assisting in the development of a credit profile?
Elizabeth, remove the inquiry or remove the credit file?
I think they're wanting to, the question, if a synthetic ID fraud app is identified, they're asking, is there ability to remove the inquiry to avoid assisting in the development of a credit profile? So maybe both open-ended there on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll assume that it was basically removing the inquiry means removing the credit file itself, and I don't think, and that's a question best answered by the CRAs, but I don't think there is a process today for removing records or credit files based on synthetics because they don't know about it. Issuers don't tell the CRAs whether or not we think it is it is a synthetic identity.
But I think you can actually reach out if you identify that someone has submitted an application, this is D, and you determine that you think it is a synthetic identity, that your institution can reach out to the credit bureaus and report it, though.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Let's go to some piggybacking. And I know, Carmel, you mentioned this. I know that each of our speakers have covered a bit of this, but we want to talk about the credit piggybacking a bit more here. Synthetics are moving away from credit piggybacking. Would it be, could you, either of you speakers, elaborate a little bit more on that? And what are you observing some new MOs emerging? What are you seeing happening?
This is Carmel. So I think that it's tricky because I think that each synthetic is doing, has their own path, and it's difficult to determine exactly what they might be doing. But I think that as we've seen more and more solutions come out that target credit piggybacking, they've gotten wise to this process and figured out other ways around it. One of the things I think we're seeing the most as we cut down on credit piggybacking is the increase of these longer nurture spans, where you might see an identity that's been put together and because they can't do credit piggybacking, maybe they just start applying, they nurture it for 6 to 12 months, and then all of a sudden we start to see them go bad. So less credit piggybacking, I would say, is leaning towards longer credit nurturing lifespans for each of the synthetics.
Excellent. Additional thoughts from our speakers? Okay, so another question I want to move on to then is that for the original account that the piggybacking occurred from, what's the standard practice in the industry for actions on that account? Are they proactively closed? Is the original account that is used for adding and rotating authorized users even prosecuted? Let's talk a little bit again about that, that original account there.
I can start, and Carmel and Dee, you can add to it. What I would say, it would have to depend on the bank's procedure or the FI's procedures, right? If a customer is adding an authorized user, it's perfectly within their entitlements to do that. But when the customer starts to do it in an excessive or abusive manner, then it raises some questions. But certainly, I would encourage folks to go have that discussion with your internal sort of legal and compliance folks.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Sandeep said. It depends on your institution's procedures. And I think most institutions, if they are finding that people are piggybacking in a fraudulent manner, that they are reporting it as suspicious activity from that standpoint, rather than contacting authorities to, file charges on the original or the people that have the original accounts that they're using to piggyback off of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think just to add a little bit more, from the Bureau standpoint, in terms of how it might impact their credit score, it's my understanding that as they're adding on users, if they give them their own card and they then become fraudulent or do not pay it back, that the original user's credit isn't impacted at least severely by it, which is why why we saw such an increase in it, in that, if they're willing to pay that initial user a couple $100 to be added on, it doesn't actually impact them directly. I think from a lending standpoint, you can either close the account or put a flag to know that this is suspicious behavior. But I think at least initially, that's why it was such an attractive method for these synthetics.